rare in my arcade port series that we come across an arcades game that has got pretty much good or extremely good home conversions across all platforms. Silkworm, just like this 1990 Jaleco release of Rodland, are two exceptions in which every platform had a decent version of the game. I have covered and suffered playing some god-awful games in this series, but really can't say this about Rodland at all. It's a game that I knew of in the early 90s through seeing it advertised in Commodore Format magazine, and I never actually owned it. More on that later though. I personally don't recall it in the arcade either, but regardless, this type of cutesy colourful platformers right up my street and will appeal to Bubble Bobble and Rainbow Islands fans, of which I've already covered in this series. It's a simple concept of using a magic wand to bash the living daylights out of cutesy monsters, which then progresses the player to the next stage. Two protagonists are in this game named Tam and Tit, who also create ladders which magically sparkle away as they are made. The aim of the game is to rescue the mother who was trapped in a castle. So like I said, fans of Bubble Bobble and Rainbow Islands will find this appealing as it's very similar in its basic concept of gameplay. It's a fun arcades game and has had several good home conversions like I've said. So today we are ranking from worst to best of the home conversions of Rodland. People might laugh at Spectrum games, especially those outside of the UK who didn't grow up with one. I didn't grow up with a Spectrum, although later on I went to have pretty much every model, and these days I've even built my own modern ZX Spectrum from scratch. I love it and appreciate it as a part of computing history. Those who laughed, I often think of that Liam Lynch song, United States or whatever. So how is the 1991 Storm software conversion? Well, quite possibly one of the Spectrum's best arcade ports, right next to Rainbow Islands. This is one smooth and flicker-free home conversion for the 128K Spectrum models. Granted, no music, but some great sound effects here. In between gameplay and at the start, we are greeted with some very nicely drawn up graphics, which resembles the arcades game, nicely complete with music. As for the black backgrounds and white outlines of characters and scenery, granted, Rodland is a colourful game and clearly the Spectrum couldn't pull this off. But as for fluid gameplay with really nice controls, I think that makes up for it. If you had a ZX Spectrum back in the day and happened to be playing this on a black and white portable TV, you wouldn't have noticed a difference anyways. I did find that sprites were fairly fast on this conversion, making it a fairly challenging port of the game. Released back in 1991, developed by Doomsday Machine and published by Storm, the Amstrad CPC conversion was programmed using Mode 0, which is why we got a beautifully presented game here. Amstrad fans watching this video will be thankful that recently I've praised a few games for this platform. As we know, the Amstrad CPC got its more than fair share of terrible arcade home conversions, but that isn't the case here for Rodland. For an 8-bit machine, this game looks great and to an extent it plays well too. So on with the not so great. Firstly, we have no music here, sound effects only, which to be honest don't actually sound that bad. Secondly, we have to wait for the disc to load each stage. If you had this game on cassette, then I would imagine this was even worse. Thirdly, it is on the laggy side, although for sure it's playable and very enjoyable to play. Fourthly, the 1990 arcades game would see Tam and Rip fly into the next screen, but here, like I say, we do have to wait for stages to load up instead. In terms of hit collision detection, this is really spot on and the controls are really tight too when hitting out with your wand and making ladders appear. Overall, a very bright and colourful home conversion, which many likely would have enjoyed playing back in the day. And like I always say on these nice looking Amstrad CPC games, you missed out if you had a green screen monitor. This is one game I wanted as a kid, which released smack on my era of Commodore 64, which was 1991, but it never happened. If you remember, the early 90s in the UK, Toys R Us were pretty much the only place selling the big releases, mainly on the Hit Squad label. corner shops mainly sold the cheap budget games. I've seen this advertised time and time again in Commodore Format magazine, but never found it, and mail ordering seems very sketchy back in those dark age days. Anyways, this Storm release is very good, or at least the best of the 8-bit computer versions. Some have argued that it appears to be unfinished because of lack of background imagery and music, and I am pretty sure these could have been implemented into the game, but it wasn't. Likely memory constraints, I'm not sure. It's a lovely play and very smooth indeed. I didn't notice any sprite flicker here at all. I also appreciate that the coder added the travelling to the next stage animation here, even though it's always travelling upwards. The thought was there and it looks really cool. Bombs that explode in the game are pixelated but seems to do the trick. Overall, a very decent C64 conversion that was right up in my street in the early 90s. I got to play it years later, so better late than never. Now, the issue we have here is a case of a really awesome Game Boy game, which, in true British style, a jolly good play, old boy. But the issue why I can't rank this any higher is due to the fact that this is a multi-scrolling game, and of course the arcade game was actually just single screen. Regardless, this is a super great Game Boy game that released in 1993 by Jaleco Entertainment. It is very faithful to the arcade game, considering this is a handheld version with a tiny 2.6-inch screen. The music and sound effects here are excellent and just so joyful to listen to. The gameplay is super smooth and includes an awesome introduction with the Looking for Mum storyline. One thing it is missing is flying to various stages. Instead, this version fades out and into subsequent stages. If you had this back in the day, I am jealous. I must have had my first Game Boy around 1993, but don't recall seeing this one for sale. Anyways, I was too busy hooked with Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. What a game. In true Nintendo Entertainment System style, we have a fairly unique version of Rodland. Although the same mechanics are here and the same principles of beating enemies with a wand are still here, this is scaled down with fairly mediocre gameplay. The music has been changed completely here, possibly a copyright issue, and the backgrounds are generally blue with some bland looking clouds scattered around here and there. It does of course suffer at times tremendously with sprite flicker as per usual for NES games. This version released in 1993 by Jaleco Entertainment, which was a fairly late release for a then 8-year-old console. If you want to see how NES games are unique compared with other versions, with NES that is, I seriously urge you to check out my arcade ports video on Altered Beast. The NES version of that will truly blow your mind. Anyways, like I say, a fairly average game, but definitely not one of the Nintendo NES's best games. Atari ST users had a superb port of Rodland, which released in 1991, again by Storm. This is a great game, and it's actually refreshing to say this about an Atari ST arcade conversion. As many of you are aware, most ST games were fairly bad. Again, just like the Amstrad CPC, not here. This is a very faithful 16-bit game that is fun to play and includes flying the stages rather than fading out or waiting for the next stage to load up. The music and sound effects combined are really well done here. I have found in the past that Atari ST games would drown out the music when sound effects take place, but this is well balanced here. As you can see from the gameplay footage, this is one brightly coloured game. The only issue with this is that it does suffer from frame rates occasionally, particularly when bombs exploding too much is happening at once on screen. I have seen much worse for the Atari ST, and it really isn't that bad, truth be told. The backgrounds are also cheery and faithful looking to the arcades game. Yup, this is definitely up there as one of the ST's proudest moments. Now, if you thought the Atari ST port was pretty good, then the Commodore Amiga's version triples its greatness and provides an almost arcade-perfect release. Well, as far as 16-bit home computers were concerned, and that's why I'm ranking this version in first place. This version is so good, it is often said to be one of the best platformers on the Amiga, full stop. It's so faithfully ported that even flying around to different stages is done the right way here. The first couple of stages, for example, fly you over to the right, followed by flying upwards. It's more colourful than the ST version, and the music is just wow. When people who were likely brought up with a console and claim that home computers were terrible, I play games like this one on the Amiga and I chuckle at those type of comments. This could be considered as console-like quality and wouldn't look out of place on the Super Nintendo. It's responsive to control, shooting ladders gives us a really funky, bright, sparkly cloud before generating the ladders. It's silky smooth, no sprite flickering. Really, you need to play this version just to appreciate the pure brilliance and genius behind it. So that's it for today's ranking, the various different home conversions of the very awesome Rodland. This one's been requested a hell of a lot in the past, and I finally got around to it. So which version would you have put in top spot? Do you agree with me that the Amiga deserved this? Which version did you play growing up? Which one did you enjoy most playing? Anyways, until next video arrives, thanks for watching.